It's time for another retro game review. And now we're playing with power. Welcome to a first game review from one of the most beloved consoles to hit the homes and hearts of many, the Nintendo Entertainment System. In my console introduction episodes, I've been picking launch lineup and or pack-in titles to review, and the NES is no exception. While the NES, and many consoles for that matter, came with multiple pack-ins over the lifespan of the console, one title, at least in the North American theater, really stood the test of time. Plug in your zapper and be sure to have a working CRT, because it's time to review Duck Hunt. As is the norm, I wish to direct you to another video related to the game I'm about to review. I'm actually relatively unfamiliar with this creator. I found this video while searching for some good Duck Hunt content out there, and this one really wows me. The channel name is Jeremy Parrish VideoWorks, and this Duck Hunt retrospective is top notch. I fully intend to investigate their content in greater detail in the near future because, well, the link is in the description. Watch it, because I'm done explaining myself. Bojanks, 82 years young, has come to this game every day for the past 39 years to shoot the ducks. But last month, Bo made a discovery. The ducks were gone. Some say Bo shot all the ducks. Individuals more attentive to Bo's accuracy say all the ducks flew away. Some say the ducks disguised themselves as discs. And some people think that Bo used to play games A and B and shoot at those ducks over there. But it could be that there's just no room in this modern world for an old man with a zapper and a CRT and his ducks. I truly hope I changed that enough for it to qualify as parody and not plagiarism. Duck Hunt is a light gun or zapper game for the NES. While effectively a one-player game, another player can grab the controller and direct the ducks in Game A. Your objective is to shoot the targets. One duck will appear at a time in Game A, two at a time in Game B, or two clay discs, pigeons, in clay shooting. It's pretty straightforward, and the light gun technology is really cool, but with CRT televisions becoming harder and harder to find, playing this game on original hardware will become increasingly more and more difficult. I was fortunate enough to get this 5-screw cart in a Goodwill auction during the pandemic, and I'm excited to use it for this review. I think we can declare that Made in Taiwan sticker to have migrated from some other piece of electronics from the era. While I do enjoy cleaning up games and consoles from previous users, I also appreciate and attempt to respect the specific history that each individual unit has gone through. There's a story behind every crack, stain, spill, Sharpie branding, and sticker. This appears to be harmless, and every time I see it, I can only imagine the sequence of events that led to it adhering to this cartridge. While I have an ample supply of 2600 and 7800 carts, and a small amount of Intellivision and 5200 carts, I only currently own 4 physical NES carts, plus an EverDrive, which I will use in most of my future NES reviews. In fact, we'll see the use of flash carts for the Genesis and SNES as well, partially for financial reasons and partially for space-saving reasons. There are so many large libraries out there, and they can get overwhelming. My primary personal collections are for the 2600 and the 7800. I really don't wish to move into a bigger home and push back my target retirement age for the sake of showing a physical cart for each of these low-budget game reviews that I plan to do, so... Alright, incessant ramblings aside, let's shoot some ducks. My youthful experience. My first experience with Duck Hunt was as a 5 to 6-year-old visiting some family from out of state. They had one of those new state-of-the-art Nintendo Entertainment Systems and a handful of games. 3 in particular that I remember from that first visit. Donkey Kong, Donkey Kong Jr., and Duck Hunt. We all took turns playing all of these games. At the time, Donkey Kong Jr. was my favorite. But Duck Hunt was definitely a hit, and it was entertaining to me. I would visit the game occasionally, off and on, over the years. Friends from school all had copies in the form of a combo cart with some platformer. And while that platformer certainly had a stronger hold on our attention, Duck Hunt would get some love too. During the brief few years I owned my own NES, I never bothered to purchase Duck Hunt. Although I had purchased the console brand new, it was quite late in the lifespan of the console, as the lone pack-in was that platformer. Not Luigi, that other guy. Bros 3. All the better because I would never bother to acquire a zapper. For whatever reason, I just found different games that I wanted to spend my babysitting money and allowance on. I guess I would describe my youthful experience with Duck Hunt as good, memorable, and enjoyable, but it was never my first choice, nor the first choice of any of my friends. Look. The look has some notable positives and some notable negatives. While the scenery looks good, you are stuck with two static screens to choose from, depending on if you want to shoot at ducks or discs. The backgrounds look good, and the grass and trees between you and the ducks is a nice touch, but very, very limited. While scrolling backgrounds would eventually become a mainstay on the NES, these unmoving backgrounds were still relatively common when this game was developed, although this feature was gradually being displaced. The ducks and your canine companion look pretty good. There are very limited animation frames, but these frames capture all the detail that is really required for a game of this time period. The look would have been excellent for the mid-1980s, especially for gamers whose previous home gaming experiences were on Atari, Coleco, Magnavox, Mattel. I'll give the look a good rating for here in this standalone setting. If I were to go on to compare it to the look of future games that would come out for the NES, that rating would obviously take a hit. Sound. I like the sound. Some cute little jingles, quack, 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 shots fired, the condescending dog. It's good stuff. Even the clay shooting audio is good. It's apparent to even the most unobservant people that have bothered to observe the audio on my previous game reviews that the NES handles audio in a far superior manner than anything I've covered so far. Of course, one game does not define a console's audio capability. By having selected launch titles so far for all of my reviews, though, comparing the audio progress from one system to another is a fun and enjoyable experience. Everybody can clearly see how the graphics progress after watching just a few screenshots. But the sound in games is every bit as important, and visiting these titles of the past is as much of a journey into the bleeps and bloops as it is one into the pixels. The Duck Hunt audio sets the ambience and does a good job of creating an immersive gaming experience. As much so as the light gun, in my humblest of all opinions. Gameplay. The gameplay is good. The ducks move smoothly enough to not feel awkward. The clay discs as well. You don't really have much to complain about with the controls. You point the zapper where you want to shoot, then you fire the trigger. If you missed, it's on you. Okay, there is some controller functionality with this game. A friend can control the flight of the ducks in game A. This control's fine too. The game has a good degree of randomness with the flight of the path of the ducks, and while the discs follow predictable paths, actually, I find the clay shooting to be more difficult. That said, you are provided with analog difficulty settings. Too hard? Get closer to your screen. Too easy? Scooch back. It's as brilliant as it is simple. Other. While this game is fun to play, and I enjoyed revisiting it for this review, it does lack the ability to keep my attention for long stretches of time. One method that retro gamers have used to extend the replayability of this game is to speedrun it. While I have done quite a bit of speedrunning in the past, this is not a game I have attempted to perform speedruns of. The category I'm most familiar with is one with a score goal. Higher level speedrunners of that category are at the mercy of the random number generator. Basically, different colored ducks are worth different amounts of points. As time is your goal in any speedrun, you may need to start an extra round to hit just one more duck, so you can reach the points prerequisite. Speedrunning may or may not be for you, but if Duck Hunt is a game you like, but like me, is a game you feel you can't find reasons to extend its replayability, speedrunning is something to consider. Actually, that advice can go for any game. I bring it up for this review because it fits all the criteria I mentioned mere moments ago. For for me. The one-player experience. Duck Hunt is effectively a one-player game, and so the one-player experience is unhindered by not having someone to play with. Sure, taking turns is an option, and if you have a friend handy, they can try to outwit you by controlling the duck. But really, either of these options only trivially alter the experience. I feel like an opportunity was wasted here. This game was released at a time when it was not unknown to have two-player co-op or two-player simultaneous competitive games on home console. Atari made many games with these options on multiple platforms, although I'm unaware of any light gun games on any platform that do. If I'm overlooking something, go ahead and blast me in the comments. Still, I can only imagine how much more joy could have come out of this game if they'd gone that route. Of course, needing two zappers to play this way may have been part of the equation to not include this. Relevance today. Ports have been made for compatibility with modern TV sets. While it may or may not feel the same to play with a Wii remote instead of a zapper, options are out there. I do find it interesting that Duck Hunt never developed into a franchise. I suppose with all the success Nintendo had with Metroid, Zelda, and that other guy, this is a game that just didn't have the marketability of those legendary IPs. Duck Hunt is unlikely to hold the relevance of those, but the fact that I compared it to those just now is my declaration that its relevance today is notable. It may be niche at this point in time, and I can really see this going either way in the future. I'd give it equal likelihood to experience a resurgence as I do for it to fade into oblivion. But as far as today is concerned, its relevance is doing more than just hanging on. Perhaps a more accurate analogy is that it is casually treading water. Who would like this? Gun-toting Americans and anyone with a vendetta against poultry. The NES has a robust following, even to this day, and while nostalgia plays a role for all of my reviews, the game should hold some appeal to nearly anyone. Persons who are sensitive to comic-style animated wildlife being hunted for sport will probably oppose. And while I'm typically not one to dive too deep into human psychology, anyone who has had a bad experience with a firearm will not need to explain to me that they will never play this game, if that is their decision. For the rest of the general public, I think most people will find it cute and fun, but not one to occupy any significant percentage of their logged gaming hours. If you like light gun games, you should get some satisfaction out of this, but it might not take very long before you look for something else to play. I sometimes wonder how well known this game would have been had it not been multi-carded with that other guy. Overall, Duck Hunt is a game that I have always liked. It has never been a game that I have had a lot of passion for, but it is fun, and I do like it. It's a good game, if only for a few minutes to satisfy an itch to depart from more traditional controller interfaces. I'll likely play this with other Zapper games to better justify dusting off my light gun. And since very few NES Zapper games have ever been able to keep me engaged for lengthier durations, it would be a no-brainer, for me, to include this in any Zapper marathons I may embark upon in the future. Next. You can't do this with Nintendo. See you next mission. Did I really get through that entire script without a typo? Finally! I'm an excellent speller! Speller. It's time for another retro game review. Now, with blast processing. Seriously, you just can't do this with Nintendo. It's time for our first Sega Genesis game review. And, as is the norm on this channel for console introductories, I'm selecting a pack-in title for the system. I considered reviewing Altered Beast, which as far as I can tell was the first pack-in for the console. But after a bit of deliberation, made the executive decision to go with Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic's marketability and recognizability was king of Sega branding for a long time. And well, for my first NES review, I opted to go a different route than this, picking Duck Hunt over that mysterious platformer that revolutionized jump physics in gaming. I'm going with a more popular franchise to launch my Genesis, or Mega Drive for those of you overseas, reviews. I know, this game has been analyzed in every which way, and just a simple YouTube search will provide hundreds of results, reviews, retrospectives, praises, and criticisms. I'm not sure I can add any new perspectives on this, but hopefully my take on this game won't result in a complete waste of your time. I'm here to document my current experience with the game, with minor snippets of background info and speculation, along with the extended tangents and ramblings. I won't go into great detail on too many things, as it can easily turn into an hour-long rabbit hole, covering topics that have already been stated over and over again, many by content creators with a deeper connection to the brand and a significantly higher production value. And as I could direct you to one of those Sonic deep dives, I'm going to go another direction with my recommended viewing for this review. It can be helpful sometimes to watch, read multiple reviews on a game, getting different perspectives. I've directed you to this creator in the past, and really find his Sonic review to have a good balance of insightfulness and brevity. So if you check out the description below, please feel free to check out the link I provided to No Swear Gamer's review of Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic the Hedgehog is a fast-paced platformer. Or rather, it was very, very heavily marketed as such. While it has all the core concepts of a horizontally, sometimes vertically, scrolling platformer, it has come to my attention that the fast factor may or may not be a good representation of this game. Let's find out together if this scrutiny is valid. Is Sonic fast hyperbole, or founded in credibility? You'll be quick to notice that, if you've been watching my reviews in sequence, that this is my first one to feature a flash cart. I explained previously my reasons for this necessity, specifically for 3 consoles in particular, and to bait you into watching all of my previous videos, I'm not going to tell you where you can find that information. Although, to be fair, your top 2 guesses are highly likely to be 100% spot on for my reasoning behind this. Oh, wait! Never mind, I do have this obviously genuine Sonic cart right here. Wow, that came out of nowhere. My youthful experience. Growing up, I had very, very minimal experience with Sonic, or even the Genesis in general for that matter. Effectively, nearly all of my friends when I was in elementary school owned Nintendos. My household owned an Atari 7800, and one friend, who I'll call Sean for the purposes of this video, was my lone buddy who owned a Sega Genesis. I have many memories of playing with Sean. Usually we would go outside and pretend to be the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, or go sledding in the winter. We bonded heavily over playing and watching basketball as well. And I specifically remember the 2 of us slurping down some Flintstones branded orange sherbet flavored frozen push-up popsicles. But there are a handful of vague memories playing his Genesis as well. While we played a lot of sports titles, Sonic made its way into the rotation from time to time. I wasn't very good. And at that age, dying early and often in a video game didn't really make it very fun. Handing off the controller to play a 1-player game that I wasn't good at and only had access to when I was at a friend's house didn't really motivate me to get good either. The look. Well, here we go. Wow. Maybe I've been playing too many 2600 games over the last year or so, but wow. Welcome back to the world of 16-bit Mr. 999. Scrolling parallax backgrounds, bright and lively colors, excellent sprite work, complete with facial expressions and body language. It looks fantastic. As you progress from one zone to another, you experience a variety of aesthetics. Some are exceedingly appealing, while others have more of a 8-bit feel with just greater detail. Now, I'm using RF output on my Genesis. I do plan to get a composite cable for my Model 1 eventually, but this is what I have for now. It still looks pretty good, and my capture software actually looks better than what I see on my CRT. A lot of the text on my television has a very distracting rainbow effect, especially on the smaller white lettering, and some various non-text borders as well. I assume some of this will clear up with composite out instead of RF, but maybe not, since it's much less obvious on the game footage I'm capturing through my GB-USB 2. But seriously, that's my biggest complaint about the look, and it's a nitpicky thing. At least, usually it would be, but it's very noticeable. However, as distracting as it is before you begin to get into the game, it's only really a distraction during idle time. When I'm controlling the hedgehog, it becomes a non-issue. The sound. This is a great soundtrack. Of course, as my first review for this console, I won't really find out until I tackle a few more Genesis titles to see how it compares to the rest of the library. As standalone audio, it's great. The sound effects are great, and the music is kind of iconic. Even though the Sonic franchise today has been through some periods where it's been delegated to more of a shovelware role, those that remember the glory days of this little blue mammal can be instantly transported back in time to, hopefully, happy times whenever music from this game begins to play. I like it. I give the quality of the audio for this game an exceptional rating. If anything, it lacks in the quantity department. I know, that is a criticism that I could have used in all of my previous game reviews. But up until now, I haven't reviewed a game where the music was so good that I wanted more. Sonic is a breakthrough in that regard. Well, as far as my review chronology is concerned. Games with great soundtracks came out before Sonic, but I have yet to cover any of them. So far. Gameplay. There is a bit of a mixed bag here. I don't wish to beat a dead horse, as many of my opinions match that of the numerous reviews for this game out there, but it still needs to be stated. The first zone exemplifies the Sonic Fast reputation. Very well designed stages that consist of all the elements a good scrolling platformer should have. The option to go fast without punishment, and the option to take your time and explore to find secrets. Multiple paths that diverge and converge multiple times. It gives you a sense of freedom and is immensely fun. As soon as you reach Marble Zone, the game becomes a wait-a-thon. This is my first time that I can recall reaching Marble Zone, and after only a couple of deaths, started experimenting with using damage boosts to skip the agonizingly slow jump and wait sections that absolutely riddle this entire zone from nearly start to finish. Now, there are hints of puzzle elements thrown in, which I like, but they aren't expanded upon, and you don't need to build on what the game teaches you. That said, I don't want to go into too much of a tangent on level design, as that has been done abundantly for this title. It's merely something I feel would leave this review incomplete if I didn't at least bring it up. The gameplay is actually pretty good. Very good, to be honest. The momentum, acceleration, jump physics feel incredibly innovative for the era, and the slope mechanics make it abundantly clear, right from the get-go, that the terrain is not mere obstacles, but an interactive environment that creates an amazingly dynamic gaming experience. Throw in a bad guy here or there, and the gameplay and controls are really, truly remarkable. It's not without its setbacks, however. There are many times in this game when you develop a sense of confidence, build up some speed, jump at a point that feels just right, only to get wrecked by some spikes, or an enemy, or a pit. Okay, so we can't go over the fence. Obviously, with only 18 stages in the entire game, it doesn't take many playthroughs to memorize the maps. From my many years of speedrunning the Lost levels, I'm very aware knowing what lies ahead can greatly change how difficult a game feels, or how many cheap deaths you receive, depending on your perspective. The boss fights, at least the ones I've made it to, don't feel very challenging or rewarding. I haven't put very much time into this game and already see the boss fights as more of a let's artificially make the game feel longer delay tactic than any significant threat to my progress. I think if you approach this game with a I want to go fast attitude, you will have many disappointments. However, I have not bothered to learn the speedrun strategies. Having finally given this game some moderate playtime, however, this is something I may look into. For a more casual gamer, this game is fine, but I recommend to not treat it as a gotta go fast experience. There are some well-hidden secrets, and others in more likely locations. And while the rewards for finding them aren't always worth the trouble, it does feel good to make these discoveries. The game lacks the balance and refinement of a platformer of today, but serves up the fun relatively well. I struggle with making a definitive declaration on the gameplay. This is a game I want to play fast, and the introductory stages reward me for this. Then, for whatever reason, I'm told to slow down, repeatedly, by the game. Oftentimes I'll be enjoying the game despite the Sonic the Snail Sloth stages, taking my time, making sure not to get too aggressive, and for one reason or another, after spending 5 minutes in a stage that felt like it should have been 30 seconds long, become overzealous and lose a life. When the stage loads at the start of the level because I failed to activate a checkpoint, I just stop caring and generally finish off all my remaining lives quickly, going on tilt, which is a recipe to ensure zero hedgehogs will live for longer than 20 seconds. Obviously, my personal frustrations are my own, and while some of you may share these sentiments with me, I don't expect this to be a long-term issue. It truly is an EVAD thing more than a Sonic thing, which just goes to show that these reviews are really more or less snapshots in time. I totally reserve the right to change my mind on all of my opinion-based criticisms, probably because, historically, the more I play a game in general, the less conviction I have behind my early complaints. I just become able to criticize from a more rational point of view as opposed to an emotional one. Other. The bonus stages to collect the Chaos Emeralds are difficult for me. I've seen and heard others mention that these stages are relatively easy to master, but I am far, far from developing the feel for them. For me, this is a challenge I can give myself, should I ever find the main game to lose its luster and lack the funness element. The other side of my personality doesn't really care if I don't improve at this, as it does feel like an unnecessary side quest. As a pick-up-and-play title without a manual, I had some interesting learning experiences. Of course, this is the digital era, and opting to not look up the info in the manual is on me. When I was playing one of these bonus rounds on stream, I heard a little jingle. It sounded positive, but I was clueless as to its meaning. My beloved chat was there to clue me in that I had earned a continue. I can only imagine my confusion if I hadn't known where the computer came from, because I hadn't been broadcasting at the time. Anyway, let me know in the comments if it's worth my time to improve my bonus game. Is the reward worth the challenge? The one-player experience. Being a one-player only game, I think we can move on to the next segment. Relevance today. While Sonic's popularity tends to wax and wane, it would be ignorant of me to say he will fade into obscurity. Every console generation finds some way to include Sonic, and the Sonic branding, unless done horribly wrong, seems to be on stable enough footing to last for quite some time. We see this game resurrected in the modern era with ports and remakes. It's available to play with current technology, and as the years roll on by, and the generation that grew up with this continue to advance through time, it's not an unrealistic premonition to envision these people bonding over Sonic 1 with their grandchildren. If you want to play on original hardware, you are in luck. I'm not too familiar with the market saturation of Genesis titles, but at any given moment, an eBay listing containing at least one copy finds its way into my searches that don't even have Sonic or Genesis in my search terms. It's hard to say what specific legacy this specific Sonic title will carry into the future. Many of the same pros and cons I mentioned here are thoughts shared by many on the internet. It's funny to think that this game was in direct competition with Nintendo's popular platforming Plumber, an NES title that had about 100 playable stages, and a soon-to-be-released SNES title with 96 unique exits. Sega rode the 18 stages of Sonic 1 for a long time, with an excellent marketing campaign, and let's face it, it's a fun game. We sit here 30 plus years after the fact and criticize the level design, and I almost wish I could go back in time and see if kids felt the same way about it then that the internet does now. I mean, times were different. It has an entire world of water stages, something I hope nobody ever does today. While I'm not the biggest fan of swimming and platformers, I don't detest them as much as most. But please, 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 spread them out. Unless it's Donkey Kong Country, which I will have to review at some point in time, because from what I remember, that game got swimming physics so right. Typical EVAD tangent aside, I think Sonic the Hedgehog still holds a significant relevance today, at least within the retro genre. Who would like this? I think it would be hard to find someone who does not enjoy the Green Hill Zone stages. Not impossible, but hard to find. The entire rest of the game might require a more sophisticated gamer to power through, or at least one that is more patient than I would expect. If you like a slower-paced exploration platformer with tiny puzzle elements and some hidden secrets, you'll enjoy the parts that I might find dull and boring. But to all of you who buy this game, expecting to race through levels without being punished, you might find yourself reaching for another game before you were planning to. Overall, Sonic the Hedgehog has a great look, great sound, and some moments of great gameplay. This would have been difficult for me to say in my youth, as I was undoubtedly Team Plumber. It has some drawbacks, but most of that is how it was marketed versus how it plays after the first zone. The boss fights are disappointing, but this is a game I can see myself playing casually a handful of times more, and those slow sections are enticing me to pay more attention when I watch some of my buddies speedrun this game. Who knows, maybe I'll pick this one up if I return to speedrun. I don't see myself grinding too hard for too fast of a time, but it could be a fun stream project to tackle for a few weeks. Next. Now you're spieling with... Spell it. Now you're playing with power. Superpower. See you next mission. It's time for another retro game review. In this time, Mode 7 Go. Seriously, now you're playing with power. Superpower! It's time for Super Nintendo Entertainment System game review. And you know the drill. We're going with a launch title. I could have gone with the classic pack-in, but we can jump on turtles and save a princess at another time. Besides, it's far too soon to abandon the run-on joke about not directly saying the name of that overalls wearing plumber. F-Zero it is. And while scouring through some retrospectives and reviews for some reference viewing, because it's tradition now around these parts to link to another creator who's covered the game that I'm about to, I have two for you to watch. Don't worry, they're both quite brief, roughly 3 minutes each. But both of these reviews I find intriguing. Points that I agree with, points that I don't. And it really fascinates me how they come to two very opposite conclusions over one specific aspect. Anyway, that said, please check out Nintendo Reviewer and SNES Drunk's reviews of this game, linked in the description below. Then come back here for the 999 prerogative on this futuristic racer. F-Zero is a one-player only futuristic racing game with Grand Prix and practice modes. The practice mode allows you to test out 7 of the 15 tracks, either solo or against a lone computer-controlled racer. I'll get back to this later. Grand Prix is the core feature of the game. You compete in Knight, Queen, or King League and select your difficulty. Note that Master difficulty is locked when your game is new. You can unlock that by beating the King League on Expert. Each league consists of 5 races. It does possess some hints of some arcade-esque aspects in it. You must finish each lap above a certain ranking, indicated near the upper left corner, or you will rank out. For each lap, that requirement gets tighter until the final lap, which requires you to finish top 3 to move on. You have limited lives, but can earn one by scoring enough points. Yeah. Points are nearly meaningless at this point in time in home console gaming, but it's a holdover that just won't die. Or won't die quickly. Oh, and even if you're not at risk of ranking out, you can explode. Violently. By incurring too much damage. There is a pit stop / repair station to help minimize this, and I love that you can get your repairs at full speed, or if you're in dire straits, can make a judgment call to slow down and spend more time to get more repaired. You can also explode by falling off the track, or rather, taking a jump and not landing on the track. Okay, now that the introduction is out of the way, let's get on with the review. My youthful experience. As a member of the Super Power Club through Nintendo Power Magazine, I had acquired enough credits and or points to actually get something meaningful. I chose an F-Zero card cartridge. To the best of my recollection, this box came with some gold lettering, where like the non-Super Power Club versions had red, but I could be misremembering. Unfortunately, I had sold my original SNES and all my games back around 1997 or so I'm unable to reference my childhood copy. But it's okay to have memories, regardless of accuracy. To paraphrase a great moment from the movie Lost Highway, I like to remember things my own way. How I remember them, not necessarily how they happened. As an early teen, I absolutely loved this game. The look, the sound, I played it quite a bit. Even remember being really good at it. For your information, a substantial array of my memories of being good at gaming when I was younger got flushed down the hole when I started watching retro streams on Twitch. Anyway, I had developed a style I felt was all my own, but nowadays realize others came to similar conclusions, and more devoted players expanded on them to degrees I never would have even imagined. But yeah, my youthful experience with this game, it was abundant, and it was very, very positive. The game looks great. It seems to handle everything it needs to process with little or no slowdown, lag frames. In fact, it's rare to notice any at all until you've unlocked Master difficulty. And even then, the gameplay at that level is so frantic that the subtle lag frame here or there goes mostly unnoticed in the moment. The cars, excluding the generics, look great in the 16-bit graphics. The afterburners and various features within the tracks are all looking good. The tracks are completely flat. Guess they weren't ready for hills yet, but a future racing game for the SNES that I do plan to review that did add hills didn't do it very well. So I'll take all the greatness of the look with the slopeless track design with appreciation. It's not like this wasn't more or less the standard of the time after all. The vehicles aren't animated too much, but there are a few subtle traits that make such a difference. The spells, sparks. It's like I'm hardly even trying with this aging joke anymore. The sparks when you turn while also using the shoulder button, indicating your sides are grinding against the surface. The wings, fins, etc. of the cars when you turn. It's nothing amazing. It might even go unnoticed to some. But these are the details that really stand out to me. The game's aesthetics contain such a blend of bland and colorful all throughout the entire game. The background on the horizon is okay. It does have a bit of a feel that you're just racing in a really large room and the walls, miles and miles away, are just painted or wallpapered. Upon close inspection, it is apparent that a very subtle amount of parallax is being used, but the amount of attention required to notice this pretty much means you're going to lose the race to appreciate it, if you appreciate it at all. For what it's worth, while playing, the background scrolling parallax effect is negligible. Had it been more pronounced, I feel this would have very nicely completed the wow factor that this game showcases. But then again, we can all just imagine we're driving around in the Truman Show. The city below the track, several hundred feet below, according to the manual, also feels incredibly flat. But the illusion of a vibrant, futuristic city is still conveyed well. Of course, some tracks occur in non-urban locations as well, and these are fine, too. Where the look excels, though, is in the game's ability to make it truly feel that you are going ridiculously fast. Sound. I love this soundtrack. So many good and classic tunes. My jaw dropped when I heard one of the content creators that I linked to in the description found the music to be not so impressive. Just goes to show that we don't all have to like and dislike the same things. The sound effects are good too. You really think you're getting zapped when you touch the walls. The engine hums are believable. The sound in this regard even adds to the sense of speed. And the crashes. I recently reviewed Pole Position 2 for the 7800 and found some of the crash sounds to be pretty good. And considering the audio limitations of that system, I may amend that to say very good. But F-Zero with SNES technology, jeez. The sound of these crashes could be spliced into old episodes of Mythbusters, and I bet some non-zero percentage of people watching and listening to it would be none the wiser. Okay, I exaggerated a tad there, but when you meet your fiery doom, the audio makes it crystal clear that you done goofed. As far as 999 is concerned, the audio is fantastic. Gameplay. Each car has its own properties. Top speed, acceleration, handling, etc. I do remember this game as having a bit of a learning curve for getting the hang of, but I'm far beyond that point. And while sometimes when I revisit a childhood game, one that I felt I was good at, as an adult I struggle. This game does not fall into that category. It's like riding a bike, so to speak. Well, for the Fire Stingray. I appear to be all over the place with Golden Fox, and Blue Falcon and Wild Goose I'm still okay with. My perspective on how the game handles won't be too useful to potential newcomers. I just simply don't recall how long it took me to get acclimated to the game. But once I did, well, it's nearly 30 years later, and I'm still pretty comfortable with this game. There are things to get accustomed to, like with all games, but I think if you like racing games and give yourself the time to get decent, you'll find the controls to be great. To me, today, the game doesn't feel like it's trying to cheat me, except when I do a speed run. Those generic cars that go so painfully slow that you lap always seem to spawn in the worst possible locations. This is generally overcomable if you're just trying to beat the game, but in an RTA attempt, they get quite frustrating. If you're okay with that, or at the very least accept it, then the game does a great job of playing by its own rules, and you don't get cheated. Of course, just hours after writing this script, this happened. Oh! Wait, what? I had a lot of power. I'm not sure exactly what caused this to result in a crash out, but this game has been explored in so much detail, I'm sure it's not an unknown feature. Still, I do stand by my statement that this game doesn't cheat you. Usually. So the gameplay is good. Some vehicles handle better than others, but it's nearly unanimous that Fire Stingray is the superior car. But give them all a shot. You may not like the slower acceleration of that one, especially at first when you find yourself losing speed frequently. Also under the gameplay umbrella, first several times you play Deathwind 2, you may be in for a brutal awakening. But even that crazy track becomes navigable with time, patience, and practice. One of the best parts about the practice feature is Port Town 2. There happens to be a jump you can use in conjunction with your S-Jet to skip a section of track. It's very risky, very difficult, and might not even save much time, but it's exhilarating to pull it off. Every time I try it, I go through the same series of emotions of Homer Simpson while he jumped Springfield Gorge on Bart's skateboard. This would be a significantly longer process to try out if Port Town could only be accessed in Grand Prix mode. Of course, in the emulator era, and with this game available with save states on Wii U and Switch, heck, even on original hardware with the Nakitech, this feature holds less importance in the modern age. The one-player experience. Being a one-player only game, I think we can move on to the next segment. Relevance today. The F-Zero brand doesn't seem to have much by the way of new games these days. While I speculate on this matter, I feel like anyone who would buy an F-Zero title would be fine with buying a mustachioed plumber kart video game. But the reverse would not be empirically true. The brand lives on through the marketability of Captain Falcon, which is awesome, but it does also sadden me that the legacy may be left in the dust. But that's the brand as a whole. This specific title gets re-released on Virtual Console and their equivalents quite regularly. Nintendo knows it's still a hit, so much so that F-Zero 99 is currently a thing at the time of this recording. This is a testament to how good it is. It stands on its own merit. The CPU has rubber banding AI, which is generally a mainstay in most racers at this point in time. Aside from S-Jets, it doesn't really have any items, and certainly doesn't have any lottery-based item handout system designed to punish skilled players and reward unskilled ones. The satisfaction you get from recovering from a mistake to win the race, and by doing so on nothing but your own merit, should not be scoffed at. And knowing you earned your ranked out, or you lost, or crashed out, rather than getting it because a worse racer used an item on you, just motivates you to get better. There is no magic wand in F-Zero to help you or harm you. The magic lies entirely within the enjoyment of the game. Who would like this? This is a game I would consider a must-have for SNES owners. Exceptions would include people that aren't fans of racing games, or that rare subset of individuals that enjoy a racer but don't like the behind-the-driver POV. It's a launch title for the system, but really, it holds up to the test of time, and I would have no problem calling it one of the titles that defines this console. And when I say that, it holds meaning, because, in my opinion, the SNES has the best library of any console I've ever owned. Overall. This is a great, great, great game. The biggest criticism is lack of two-player functionality. For me personally, that's basically irrelevant, as I've mentioned in the past that nearly all of my gaming is done in solitude. But as a 16-bit, one-player, behind-the-driver, POV racer, this game is excellent. I won't go so far as to call it a masterpiece, and I'll reserve that designation for other titles on this console. But this is a game I love to go back to and revisit time and time again. There will always be an ability to improve your best times. So if you haven't played this for a while, go ahead and treat yourself to some nostalgia. And if you haven't played this ever, what are you waiting for? Next. Who's in the mood to see review after review of the same game, but ported to different platforms? Well, too bad that's not next. But it is in the works. I'm sure it will be barrels of fun. Before we get to that, I'd like to tackle another retro racing title, and this one was retro when F-Zero was new. See you next mission. Strap in and click it. Fasten your safety belt and buckle up. We're going for a ride. In this episode, we're returning to 1977 with our driving controllers in hand. It's Indy 500, or the ever so cleverly named Race under the Sears branding, for the Atari Video Computer System, or Sears Video Arcade, or as we call these units today, the 2600. While scouring for some additional supplemental content for this review, I came across a couple of reviews and considered sharing one of them, but the historical context that Atari Archive provides on this title is just so dang good. So check out the link in the description and then come back here. Indy 500 is a one or two player overhead racing title, although it also has some non-racing game variations. Heads up, required. The driving controller. It looks very similar to the paddle controllers, but it's functionally different and absolutely necessary to have anything resembling an experience with this game. This is the only officially licensed release for this console to use these controllers. Fortunately, they were bundled with the game back in the day. Unfortunately, it meant developers and publishers were just not motivated to make games with driver controller support, even ones that would have greatly benefited from it. What you end up with is a game that many can't or won't play. The secondary market seems to have a substantial number of cartridges relative to driving controllers. I can only imagine many were lost, as it should be a 2-to-1 ratio in favor of controllers. But the game doesn't get a lot of attention. Many have the cart but no driving controllers. Or, and this is equally valid, you may have the game and the controllers, but can't be bothered to swap out the controllers just to play the lone compatible title. Now, the homebrew scene has produced some titles with driving controller support, but that's a can of worms for somebody else to open up. Indy 500 comes with 14 game modes. You have Game 1, Grand Prix, that's a 2-player race. First to 25 laps wins. Mode 2, Grand Prix, it's the same track, but it's the time trial mode. It's the 1-player experience. Get as many laps done as you can in 60 seconds. 3 is the Devil's Elbow track. It's the 2-player equivalent of that. 4, Devil's Elbow, time trial. Game Mode 5, Crash and Score 1. First to 50 points wins. Game Mode 6, Crash and Score 1, the 1-player variant. Crash and score as many times as you can in 60 seconds. Now, calling it Crash and Score seems to be a bit of a misnomer in my personal opinion. Is you don't really crash into the dot, you run over it and collect it and your momentum carries on. But that's just being nitpicky. Game Mode 7, Crash and Score, the second track. First to 50 points wins. Game Mode 8, same track, but the 60-second one-player equivalent. Games 9 and 10 are tag. You're it. Game 9 is the barrier layout. First to 99 points wins. Now for tag, you tag the other person, they become it, and they have to chase you down and hit you. Every second, or at least Atari time unit, they're pretty close to real seconds. I haven't actually timed them out. You earn 1 point until you get tagged, and then the other person is earning points until you tag them. Obviously, there's no one-player version of tag. An even two-player version of tag seems limited, but with the driving controller and 2 controller ports, there's not many options for that. But if you call no tag backs, you're gonna win. Game Mode 10 is tag, the motor hunt layout. Again, 99 points to victory. Track 11, Ice Sprint Race. So that's the 2-player ice sprint track, 25 laps. The ice physics, this early adaptation of ice physics, done really well. You drift. You definitely drift. Track 12, same track, but it's the 1-player 60-second equivalent. Track 13, Ice Rally, the race, 2-player race. First to 25 laps wins. And track 14, or game mode 14, Ice Rally time trial. 60 seconds, get as many laps in as you can. Those are the game modes. My youthful experience. Experience not found. I know it's easy to look at these early 2600 titles and find fault after fault, but this one is actually pretty good. I can only speculate on how a younger EVAD would have enjoyed this, but it doesn't require too much of a leap of faith to suspect that I would have really liked this title as a youngster. The 1-player game options would have been sufficient to keep me entertained, and throw in a human opponent, and it's quite possible this game would have been among my favorites in a time and place before I had any regular access to, say, an NES. Look. It looks good. Well, it looks, by 2600 standards, in 1977, yeah, I'll stand by good. Perhaps a more accurate description of the look is what you would expect from a launch title for this console. The cars look closely enough to cars. The track is clearly defined, the score/timer legible, and the crash and score dot is, oh my god, are we running over the protagonist from Adventure? But in all seriousness, the look isn't going to blow anyone away, but it accomplishes all it needs to. Sound. This is such a subjective area. To me, the audio of the game is, well, take your pick. Fine, acceptable, not annoying, fair. To be honest, TIA chip audio is difficult to do well. As long as I don't find it abhorrent and it's tolerable, I won't complain too much. There are enough titles that make poor use of the audio capabilities of the 2600, and this one doesn't fall into that category, in my personal opinion. If it does bother you, it's not so intrinsic to the experience and gameplay that playing with the volume turned down would be a hindrance. So even if you dislike it, that option remains. Does it add to the experience? Trivially. I'll score the sound as acceptable. Gameplay. The controls are awkward at first, but you get a feel for it really quickly. It doesn't take long to start completing several laps without crashing on the first track. Then you get confident and move on to the Devil's Elbow. Faster top speed and hairspins galore, this ramps up the difficulty nicely and provides a challenge that will take a little longer to perform well. Consistently well. Indy 500 implements ice physics. This is one of the early renditions of such a thing in video games. Is it the first? I'm not sure. It's the earliest implementation of ice physics that I'm aware of, and it's done really well. Like, the traction and the drifting and I mean, you've played video games with ice physics before, probably. You know what to expect, and this game does it pretty well. I'm impressed. Now, how difficult it was actually to program it that way, I'm not sure. With the limited time I've spent on these, I'm not yet sure if they're even navigable at full speed without crashing. This is something I plan to experiment. Perhaps it's a matter of finesse, and you are actually required to manage your speed well on these surfaces. And while I'm sure the internet has already discovered the answer to this, it feels like something I'm more determined to personally investigate rather than to just look it up. The overhead view, obviously, makes it unnecessary to memorize the maps. The entire course is visible to you at all times, whereas in the behind the driver POV racing games, you're kind of required to really either be on your toes or develop some map familiarity. It still takes time to acclimate how to handle the turns, but the learning curve is comparatively fast. You always know where you are. I'm directly under the Earth's sun now. Well, the obstacles are static, and in tandem with that top view vantage point, you might think Indy 500 would have a tendency to limit replayability. And these factors do contribute, indeed. But with the fun controls, the good physics engine, and the eternal ability to improve, it doesn't get old all that fast, compared to its contemporary counterparts. For 1977, this racer had some staying power. For today, of course it's not going to hold up to the replayability of modern racers. And if you were expecting me to say otherwise, I appreciate your dedication. The collision detection is really good. The slowdowns from crashes are reasonable, but getting unstuck can be frustrating. You inch your way out of the barriers at a snail's pace. And these barriers behave more like just really, really bad terrain, as you can travel through any obstacle, just not quickly. It would be a huge oversight for me to omit the glaring elephant in the room: screen wraps. While these are very intended in the crash and score and tag game modes, they make the race courses feel broken. The barrier-induced slowdowns are a good enough deterrent, however, as abusing this feature appears to be a non-optimal strategy. The gameplay makes this game very fun. It's very satisfying to zoom around, and with every crash, you feel more and more determined to keep playing and improving until you feel like you've reached a level that is highly competitive. There aren't really any duds in the game modes either. All are great, and while the game is orders of magnitude better with a second player, the solo options are done well enough to keep me from swapping carts and controllers and playing something else for a lot longer than numerous other early 2600 titles. Occasionally on the 2600 you'll experience games that exhibit some minimal to moderate to excessive sprite flicker. This game doesn't have any of that, really. Well, any unintended sprite flicker. You are a blinking sprite in the tag game. But that actually means something. It's not a tactic to work around some of the limitations of the hardware. In fact, as far as I know, the sprite flicker tool was not used until Asteroids? And I want to say that was a 1981 release. Someone in the comments will correct me if I'm mistaken on this, but I'm pretty sure that was the first one that used it as a tool to get more sprite action out of the game. So yeah, even the sprite flicker's not an issue on this game. It will be a mainstay in a lot of these 2600 reviews moving forward, except for the very, very early titles and very, very late titles where different workarounds were used to get a lot of stuff on the screen with minimal to no sprite flicker. The one-player experience. As mentioned earlier, the two-player experience is far superior. As a launch title for the 2600, though, lone gamers should be thankful for the one-player options. There are multiple examples that either left this out completely or implemented it poorly. While hindsight is typically 20/20, and one could argue with valid reasons that the 60-second timer for one-player gameplay and the first to 25 laps in two-player racers could have been tweaked or done differently, the final product is pretty good. Racing against a CPU opponent would have been awesome if it could have been done well. Later in the lifespan of the 2600, doing so would eventually become realized, but as you will soon find out from my next review, the programmers didn't yet have a good handle on CPU AI. So perhaps completing laps against a set timer was the way to go. After all is said and done, taking into account that this is an early release, the one-player experience is good. But as is the case with many early 2600 releases, sharing the experience with a human opponent is the way to go with Indy 500. Relevance today. I'm not very familiar with how this plays in emulation or if it's on any of the Atari collections. I assume poorly, but my research on the matter is indistinguishable from zero. The drive-in controller truly is a must. Any other way to play this game would be an inferior experience. And, quite frankly, on the 2600, just play Sprint Master or something similar if you lack a drive-in controller. It's not the same, but that's my recommendation for those who are unwilling or unable to play Indy 500 with the intended interface. Because of this, the game's relevance is minimal today. While a resurrection isn't completely out of the question, the racing genre has moved on and made so many advances since the contemporary setting this game was originally published in. So much so that even a remastered or remake of this would either feel greatly outdated or it would be Indy 500 recharged in name only. This is unfortunate. It's a fun little game, but it feels like it's destined to be forgotten. I suppose time will tell. Who would like this? I think a lot of people will be able to find enjoyment with this game. It has a variety of game modes, and each has its charm. It can't be stated enough that the driving controller is a must. So it's not much of a who would like it, but who would be able to play it in an enjoyable manner. As this is the case with numerous 2600 titles, it does lack the ability to hold your attention for hours on end. But I don't think you'll find yourself swapping out this card for the next game as quickly as most. It still has a lot to offer, even if only for the few who have access to an old console, an old cartridge, and an old controller. Overall, this is a pretty good game, especially for its release date. Atari published a pair of racers for the 2600 right off the bat, and this is by far the better of the two. It has a look that defines the launch lineup for this console, fair audio, and some great gameplay elements. While there are other top-down racers that I need to put more time into, my initial feeling is that Atari did it right off the bat. Next. The Sears Video Arcade Pack-In joins us in our next episode. By air or by sea, the battle is upon us. Even with numerous targets, fun is our #1 objective. See you next mission. It takes time to acclimate how to handle the curves, and the learning turn is comparatively fast. Why didn't I write it like that? Two minutes, 16 seconds. Yes, that familiar time period returns as we blast our way to victory in this 1977 launch title for the Atari 2600, Air, Sea, Battle. Also known as the pack-in for the Sears Video Arcade as Target Fun. Background viewing. There are quite a few reviews and retrospectives of this game on YouTube, and I have some internal conflict over which one to suggest to you. I've linked to Atari Archive and No Swear Gamer multiple times in the past, and both deliver, as with all games, great information about this title, and they'd be excellent supplemental content. That said, I'd like to provide some variety when I link to other creators, so for this title, I'd like to go with the very entertaining Classic Game Rooms coverage of Air Sea Battle. The review is 15 years old, according to YouTube, but it still holds up today. I truly love this guy's dry wit. Extremely funny. So give their video a view, then come back here for the 999 experience. Basics. Air Sea Battle is a 1 or 2 player vertical shooter. The Atari 2600 has no shortage of vertical shooters, and Air Sea Battle is one of them. As a launch title, it satisfies the need of 1977 gamers to destroy everything. It's not the best of this genre. Very few early releases can say that, though. But can it deliver? With 27 game modes, surely there's something that stands out. Game modes. Games 1 through 6 are anti-aircraft games, 7 through 12 are torpedo games, 13 through 15 is the shooting gallery, 16 through 18, Polaris. 19 through 21 are the bomber games, and 22 through 27 are Polaris versus Bomber. Wrap that up nicely. Oh, what is the meaning of everything I just said? Yeah, it's mostly just gibberish without a better explanation. Here's my attempt. In the anti-aircraft game modes, you are a stationary shooter with the ability to change the angle of your shot. Up on the joystick to shoot at 30 degrees, neutral to shoot at 60, and down to shoot at 90. I forgot to mention what you're shooting at. Oh yeah. Planes, jets, helicopters, the usual airborne culprits from the pre-Space Invaders era. For games 1 through 3, each target is worth a lone point. In games 4 through 6, scoring depends on the target you hit. Small jet equals 4 points, large jet 3 points, helicopter 2 points, and the 747 1 point. Now, shooting down passenger aircraft is likely to bring you into legal trouble. And this brings us to today's totally legitimate sponsor. Are you seeking legal assistance? Well, seek no longer. Lionel Hutz works on a contingency basis and will represent you with no money down. Right? The observation blimps are worth 0 points and behave like obstructions. You can avoid them, wait them out, or blast them out of your way to have a clear shot at point-worthy targets, but you will not earn or get penalized for doing so. Games 2 and 5 are the guided missiles version of these games. Games 3 and 6 are the one-player equivalents, and I'll cover the one-player modes in more depth a little later. In the torpedo games, you are a submarine, supposedly. Now the joystick controls your horizontal position and does not affect shot angle. Each player, or player versus CPU, is confined to their half of the screen. For games 7 through 9, each target is worth 1 point. In 10 through 12, there's a comparable scoring system to the 4 through 6 of the anti-aircraft mode. You're merely shooting at seacraft instead of aircraft, and the mines take the slot of the balloons. 8 and 11 have guided missiles, and 9 and 12 are versus the computer. In Shooting Gallery, you not only control the angle of your shots, but you can also position your sprite along the horizontal axis. The targets can change direction in this mode, making it feel, to some degree, that you are at a fair or carnival, playing one of those shooting games that are often found there, or at least were often found there in the late 1970s. Your targets are rabbits, ducks, and clowns, each with its own point value. I seem to recall hearing that the rabbits were originally dogs, but at the request of Sears, these sprites were changed to rabbits. I wonder if any manuals were printed with dogs instead. What an interesting relic that would be. Game 14 is with guided missiles, and 15 is the one-player mode. Polaris, and/or Bomber, the non-versus games. In these game modes, you control your speed of travel. backwards for slow, neutral for default, and forward for fast. In Polaris, you can control a ship at the bottom of the playfield. The bottommost ship is the player plugged into the right controller socket. It follows the 4-3-2-1 scoring system from games 4 through 6. Game 17 is with guided missiles, and 18 is versus a computer. In Bomber, you pilot a plane at the top of the screen. Right controller controls the lower of the two. It's effectively Polaris, but your targets are beneath you, as opposed to above you. Game 20 for guided missiles, and 21 for single-player action. In Polaris versus Bomber, the left player controls the Bomber and the right player controls the Polaris. This is a direct 1v1 matchup, pitting you against your opponent. Each hit is worth 1 point. Games 25 through 27 include mines, as always, worth 0 points, acting as obstructions, while games 23 and 26 are the guided missile variants. Game modes 24 and 27 pit you against the computer. Okay, that was a lot to go over, but now I won't need to elaborate on any of the vocabulary for the rest of this review. Huh? I didn't explain guided missiles? Ah, for the everlo... Just figure it out, okay? My youthful experience. It is possible I played this game at the home of a friend when I was very young, but I have no specific memories of it. It either left 0 impression on me, or I simply hadn't experienced it. As a youngster, I'm not sure how much I would have enjoyed this. Playing this with a friend would have been a decent experience, but I had access to many vertical shooters, even on the 2600, that this game just does not compete well against. Alone or with someone, there were just better options for me if I needed to scratch the vertical shooter itch. Look. It looks decent. We haven't entered the realm of 2600 sprite flicker, so that's a non-factor. Most sprites look pretty good by 1977 standards. The gradient on the background is okay. It's a far cry from the Activision sunset, but it's nice to have something other than a solid background, typically black, in an early 2600 release. The submarines take a bit more imagination to recognize than most sprites, but overall, it has a decent look. Sound. Pretty standard for the console and the time period. The iconic 2600 explosions provide some nostalgia. It doesn't sound anything like a real-world explosion, but Atari gamers know, instantaneously, that in the 2600 universe, that sound is an explosion. The typical bleeps and bloops that pepper numerous games from this era are present. They don't create any awe, but more importantly, are not annoying. Does it add to the experience? A little bit. I'll score the sound as acceptable. Gameplay. The controls are fine. There is, as usual, an acclimation period. Understanding the angled shots and timing your shots take a decent amount of practice and understanding. You will miss many shots in your early experience with this game. And with only one shot per player allowed on the screen at a time, there's a significant period of growing pains getting comfortable with the controls. The guided missiles game modes do allow for correction, fancy shots, and are incredibly helpful. The difficulty switch will affect the size of your projectiles. Larger shots is easier, but the advantage is negligible for beginners and irrelevant for experts. The half-screen game modes are a bit frustrating. It often feels like I would just need a tiny little bit more room to get off another decent shot. But overall, the controls are fine. There's nothing amazing here, but nothing so detrimental that it ruins the game. There doesn't appear to be any glaring glitches or serious problem areas in the gameplay, although I admittedly did not do any glitch hunting for this title. I did not come across anything spectacularly bad from a few hours of general gameplay. Other. It should be noted that this game was released before any true standardization of player 1 equals left controller port had been fully established. While with most 2600 games, the one-player controller is on the left, or in some really ambitious games uses both ports, this one bucks the eventual trend by having one-player games controlled by the joystick plugged into the right port. So if you go directly to a one-player game and think your cartridge is broken, maybe take this into consideration. It's easy to forget, especially after decades of conditioning to the contrary. The one-player experience. Yet again, we have a game that is a much better experience with a human opponent. It does offer one-player game modes, but the CPU effort is comically bad. It just fires nonstop, not even trying. And to make matters worse, none of the one-player game modes come with guided missile options. However, big brain move time. Because the CPU is so limited, you can easily simulate it. Select a two-player option with guided missiles, and hold down the fire button on one controller to simulate the CPU AI. Either with your toe or a vice grip, heck, even a sturdy rubber band. And playing the game is normal with your other controller. It's such a silly workaround, but it allows you to play with guided missiles against an opponent whose gameplay is indistinguishable from that of the computer. To be perfectly honest, even with one-player game modes and this guided missile life hack, the game just isn't very enjoyable to me as a one-player game. It's definitely better with a human opponent, but even that gets stale before exploring all the game modes. If your human opponent is comparably skilled, it does make the experience more fulfilling. But in my opinion, this just lacks that special something that would elevate it to a vertical shooter for the 2600 in the realm of the good ones. Who would like this? There are a lot of people who grew up with this game and have nostalgia for it. If you are one of these people, you don't need me to tell you that it holds a special place in your heart. For everyone, nearly everyone else, I suspect time spent on this game will only have limited moments of enjoyability. Cartridges are very abundant, so if the price is right or you have a copy collecting dust and someone who wants to play with you, go ahead and pop it in. It has some value as a party game, in the bragging rights over irrelevant skills subtext. And while there is fun to be had with this game, it is sparse, and you really need that perfect storm for this game to deliver a high entertainment value in exchange for the time you invest in it. Relevance today. As one of the original 9 launch titles, Air Sea Battle holds up pretty well. But compared to later vertical shooters that would flood the 2600, its destiny to skirt the fringes of obscurity seem locked in place. Compilations for 2600 titles are abundant and come out frequently, and Air Sea Battle is a mainstay in nearly all of these. It's cheap to re-release, and there's a nostalgic contingent of consumers that still seek it out to some degree. I feel it is included in the collections more for historical purposes than as a driving factor in increasing sales. But regardless of the reason, it's going to continue to come out time after time on these flashback consoles and game compilations, whatever their equivalents in the future will be, for as long as there's a market for classic Atari titles. Overall, Air Sea Battle is okay. There seem to be two major camps of people when it comes to reviewing this title. Those that loved it as a kid, who rate it high, and those who didn't, that don't. I'm sure you can find counterexamples of both of these, but those tend to be the exception. I love me a good vertical shooter, and to me, Air Sea Battle misses the mark. There are just too many better, in my opinion, vertical shooters on this console for Air Sea Battle to be a time consumer in this genre. Will I play it with a friend if the opportunity presents itself? Most likely. Will it be something we will bond over for more than a half an hour? Unlikely. Next. Did Coleco sabotage their home port of a big-name game for another console? See you next mission.